The sound cracked across the training compound like a rifle shot. 23 sailors froze mid-motion. Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave stood with his hands still raised, fingers spread wide, palm reddened from the force of impact. But the woman he had struck did not move, did not flinch, did not even blink. Petty Officer First Class Kestrel Adia stood exactly as she had before the blow landed, her dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Hargrave's left shoulder, her breathing unchanged, her posture utterly still. And that stillness, that absolute absence of reaction, unsettled every person watching far more than any scream ever could have. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. Maybe you've seen someone underestimated the way this woman is about to be. Stay with us, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about quiet strength. Hargrave's sneer faltered. He had expected tears. He had expected her to crumble, to finally break the way he had been trying to break her for 3 months. Instead, she stood there like a statue carved from something harder than flesh, and the silence that followed his assault stretched into something uncomfortable. Something wrong. The compound sat in the shadow of the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, where the California sun bleached everything to the color of bone, and the Pacific wind carried the salt smell of the ocean across endless rows of tactical equipment. This was home to the Navy's elite support units, the men and women who kept the Special Operations community running. And on this particular morning, it had become a stage for something no one present would ever forget. Seaman Apprentice Derek Fong stood near the equipment shed, his hands frozen on a length of rope he had been coiling. He was 19 years old and 3 weeks into his first real assignment, and he had never seen anything like the expression on Lieutenant Commander Hargrave's face. It was the look of a man who had thrown a punch and hit smoke. "You think you are tough," Hargrave said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think your silence makes you strong. But I know what you are, Oduya. You are nothing. A quota fee, a political appointment dressed up in a uniform you did not earn." Kestrel Oduya said nothing. She had not spoken an unnecessary word in the 3 months since her transfer to this unit. The other sailors had theories about her silence. Some thought she was broken, damaged from some trauma in her past. Others figured she was simply strange, one of those people who never quite fit anywhere. None of them suspected the truth. None of them could have imagined it. Hargrave stepped closer, close enough that Fong could see the vein pulsing in the lieutenant commander's temple. The man was 6'2" and built like he spent more time in the gym than the field, which was exactly the truth. His uniform was always perfect, his brass always gleaming, and his reputation for destroying careers was known across the entire base. "Look at me when I speak to you," he commanded, slowly, with the deliberate precision of someone who measured every movement. Odia shifted her gaze to meet his eyes. What Fong saw in that look made his stomach drop. It was not fear. It was not submission. It was something cold and patient and utterly unimpressed, like a predator deciding whether its prey was worth the effort. For just a moment, Hargrave took a half step backward. Then he caught himself, straightened his spine, and forced a laugh that convinced no one. "Dismissed," he said. "Get out of my sight." Odia turned and walked toward the barracks with the same measured stride she always used, neither hurrying nor lingering, as if nothing had happened at all. The red mark on her cheek was already fading, but the mark she had left on everyone who witnessed the moment would take much longer to disappear. Chief Petty Officer Ronan Slade waited until Hargrave had stormed off toward the administrative building before he moved. He was a weathered man in his late 40s with gray, threading through his dark hair, and eyes that had seen enough to know when something did not add up. He had been Odia's direct supervisor since her arrival, and in all that time he had never once seen her rattled. He found her behind the equipment shed, not crying, not shaking, simply standing with her face turned toward the ocean. When she heard his footsteps, she did not turn around. "Chief," she said. Her voice was low and even, carrying just a hint of an accent that spoke of somewhere far from California. Slade stopped a few feet away, studying the back of her head. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." She turned then, and he saw that her eyes were completely dry. The red mark on her cheek had faded to nothing, as if her skin had simply refused to hold the evidence of the assault. "I pulled your file," Slade continued. "The real one, not the cover they gave us when you transferred in." Something flickered across Oduya's face. It might have been surprise. It might have been calculation. It was gone before Slade could be certain. "That file is classified," she said. "I know people," Slade replied. "People who owed me favors from back when favors meant something." He paused, watching her carefully. Half of it was redacted, blacked out so completely I could not even see the mission designations. But what I could read told me enough. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of helicopter rotors from somewhere across the base. Oduya stood perfectly still, waiting. "You're not what he thinks you are," Slade said quietly. "You are not what any of us thought you were." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, the first crack in the mask she had worn for 3 months. "What I am," she said slowly, "is someone who has been watching Lieutenant Commander Hargrave make a very serious mistake." Slade felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. In 30 years of naval service, he had learned to recognize danger in all its forms. And right now, standing in the shadow of a supply shed with the California sun beating down around them, he recognized it in the woman before him. "Where are you planning?" he asked. Kestrel Oduya did not smile, but something in her eyes kindled, something that had been banked and waiting. "I am planning," she said, "to let him keep making mistakes until he makes one he cannot take back. And then I'm going to show everyone on this base exactly who they have been underestimating." She turned and walked away, leaving Chief Slade standing alone with a question that would keep him awake for nights to come. Because he had seen her file. He had seen the redactions and the classification codes and the single phrase that had made it through and censored, tried and qualified. Only one kind of sailor earned that designation. And if the quiet woman who had just taken a slap without flinching was what those 2 words suggested, then Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave had just made the worst mistake of his career. 6 hours earlier, before the sun had fully risen over Coronado, Kestrel Oduya had been the first person at the equipment shed. She moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the ease of someone accustomed to operating without light, her footsteps silent on the concrete, her breathing slow and controlled. The morning air carried the bite of ocean cold, and most of the base was still asleep. She heard him before she saw him. The clatter of gear falling, followed by a muffled curse in a voice too young to have learned how to swear properly. She rounded the corner of the shed and found Seaman Apprentice Fong tangled in a mess of rigging lines, his face flushed with frustration and the particular embarrassment of someone who knows they are failing at something simple. Oduya stopped and watched him struggle for a moment. He had not noticed her yet, too focused on the knots he had somehow made worse with every attempt to fix them. His uniform was already stained with grease, and there was a desperate quality to his movements that spoke of someone who had been at this for a while. She could have walked past. It was not her responsibility to train junior sailors, and getting involved meant drawing attention to herself. For 3 months, she had made herself invisible, unremarkable, just another face in a unit full of faces. That invisibility was a tool, carefully maintained. But she remembered what it felt like to be young and overwhelmed and certain that everyone was watching you fail. "You are fighting the line," she said quietly. Fong jerked upright, nearly tripping over the coiled rope at his feet. "Petty Officer Oduya," he stammered. "I did not see you there. I was just trying to get the rigging ready before morning muster, and I thought I knew how to do this, but the knots keep slipping, and now everything is tangled, and Lieutenant Commander Hargrave is going to lose his mind if this is not ready, and I have already messed up twice this week, and I cannot afford another mark on my record." He ran out of breath and stood there, chest heaving, looking at her with the wide eyes of someone expecting judgment. Oduya stepped forward and crouched beside the tangled lines. "Show me what you were trying to do," she said. For the next 20 minutes, in the gray light before dawn, she walked him through the rigging process step by step. Her hands moved with a precision that came from years of muscle memory, demonstrating each knot and hitch with patient repetition. She did not raise her voice. She did not express frustration when he fumbled. She simply showed him again and again until his fingers began to understand what his mind had not yet grasped. By the time the first real light of morning began to warm the compound, the rigging was properly secured and Fong was staring at her with something approaching awe. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "Your file says you are an intelligence specialist." Oduya stood and brushed the dust from her knees. "I know a lot of things my file does not mention," she said, and then she walked away before he could ask anything else, leaving him with the strange feeling that he had just been helped by someone far more significant than he understood. That had been 6 hours ago. Now, after the slap, after the confrontation with Chief Slade, Kestrel Oduya sat alone in her quarters and allowed herself a moment of stillness that had nothing to do with control. The room was small and sparse, regulation in every way. Orak, all desk, all lanker. Nothing personal on the walls, nothing that would tell a visitor anything about the woman who lived here. But in the bottom of her locker, beneath a false panel she had installed herself, there was a photograph. She pulled it out now and held it in hands that remained perfectly steady. The image showed 8 people in desert camouflage, their faces covered with dust and exhaustion, their eyes bright with the particular bond that forms between people who have faced death together. She was in the center of the group, younger by 7 years, her arm around the shoulder of a man whose smile seemed too wide for the grim landscape behind them. "Marcus," she said softly. His name was the first unnecessary word she had spoken in months. They were all gone now, every face in that photograph except hers. A mission that was never supposed to happen, orders that came from somewhere so high up the chain that questioning them meant ending your career. She had questioned them anyway, and they had gone anyway, and she had been the only one to walk out of that valley alive. The official report called it an intelligence failure. The classified report, the one that only a handful of people had ever seen, told a different story. A story of bad orders and covered tracks, and a rear admiral who had sent men to die rather than admit his intelligence was flawed. Rear Admiral Theodore Hargrave, father of Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave. She had not known, when she requested this assignment, that the son would be here. She had come looking for evidence, for witnesses, for anything that might finally bring justice to the men and women who had died following orders that should never have been given. Finding Vincent Hargrave had been an unexpected complication. Or perhaps, she thought now, it was an unexpected opportunity. She tucked the photograph back into its hiding place and stood. Through the small window of her quarters, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere across the base, Vincent Hargrave was probably celebrating his victory, telling anyone who would listen how he had finally put the quiet woman in her place. He did not know that she had spent 6 years in a world where a slap was nothing, where pain was a tool to be managed, and silence was survival, and patience was the difference between mission success and a body bag. He did not know that she had watched friends die in her arms and kept fighting because the mission demanded it. He did not know that the woman he was trying to break had already been broken and rebuilt so many times that she no longer remembered what fragility felt like. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Chief Slade standing in the corridor, his face troubled. "He is calling for a physical readiness evaluation," Slade said without preamble. "Tomorrow morning. Just for you. He is going to be the evaluator." Oduya considered this information. A physical readiness evaluation administered by a hostile superior officer was a time-honored method of forcing someone out of the Navy. Push them until they fail or until they quit. Either way, the problem disappears. "I understand," she said. Slade leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You do not have to do this. I can file a complaint about today. What he did was assault. There are witnesses. There are witnesses who are afraid of him," Oduya replied calmly. "Witnesses who know that his father has connections all the way to the Pentagon. Filing a complaint now would accomplish nothing except making me look weak. So what are you going to do?" She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that had unnerved Hargrave so completely just hours before. "I'm going to pass his evaluation," she said, and then I'm going to wait for him to make a bigger mistake. Slade shook his head slowly. I have seen men like him destroy people, he said. Good people. People who deserve better. Kestrel Odia thought of the photograph in her locker, of the 8 faces that would never grow old. So have I, she said quietly, and I'm still standing. The physical readiness evaluation began at 0500, when a morning fog still clung to Coronado like a gray shroud and the cold Pacific air cut through clothing like a blade. Lieutenant Commander Hargrave stood at the edge of the training field with a clipboard in his hand and a smile on his face that made the dozen assembled sailors deeply uncomfortable. Petty Officer Oduya, he called out, front and center. She stepped forward from the line, her movement precise and unhurried. She wore standard PT gear, and in the gray light, she looked smaller than usual, almost fragile. The other sailors shifted uneasily, knowing what they were about to witness, but powerless to stop it. Today we assess your physical readiness to serve in this unit, Hargrave announced, his voice carrying across the field. The standards are clear. Failure to meet them results in immediate reassignment. He paused, savoring the moment. We will begin with the run. 2 miles. Maximum time allowed is 18 minutes. The standard for women in her age group was actually 19 minutes and 30 seconds. Everyone present knew this. No one said a word. Oduya simply nodded and walked to the starting line. What followed should have broken her. Hargrave had designed the evaluation to be impossible, stacking exercise upon exercise with minimal rest between them. After the run came push-ups, then sit-ups, then a swim in water cold enough to make muscles seize. Then an obstacle course designed for special operations candidates, not intelligent specialists. Then a 3-mile ruck march with a 60-pound pack. Through all of it, Kestrel Oduya did not complain, did not slow, did not show any sign of the strain that should have been destroying her body. She finished the run in 16 minutes and 42 seconds. She completed 70 push-ups when the requirement was 45. Her sit-ups exceeded the maximum by 20. She swam the required distance in water that made other sailors gasp just watching, and her stroke never faltered. By the time she reached the obstacle course, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread across the base that something unusual was happening at the training field, and sailors found reasons to walk past, to linger, to watch the quiet woman who moved through impossible challenges like they were morning stretches. Seaman Fong stood near Chief Slade, his eyes wide. "How is she doing this?" he whispered. Slade did not answer. He was watching Oduya scale a wall that most sailors needed 3 attempts to clear, and he was remembering the 2 words from her classified file. Trident qualified, the mark of a Navy SEAL. Hargrave's smile had disappeared somewhere around the 2nd mile of the run. By the time Oduya completed the ruck march, finishing a full 4 minutes under the time he had set, his face had gone the color of old brick and his hands were shaking as they gripped the clipboard. She came to a stop in front of him, her breathing slightly elevated but controlled, sweat darkening her PT shirt, but her eyes as calm and steady as they had been when the day began. "Evaluation complete, sir," she said. Her voice carried no triumph, no mockery, just a simple statement of fact. For a long moment Hargrave said nothing. The crowd of onlookers held their breath. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his stride stiff with barely contained fury. The sailors who had witnessed the evaluation dispersed slowly, casting glances back at Oduya as they went. Something had shifted in the way they looked at her. The quiet woman who never spoke had just demonstrated capabilities that did not match her file, her rating, or anything they thought they knew about her. Chief Slade approached her after the others had gone. "That was impressive," he said carefully. "That was necessary," she replied. She bent to retie her boot, and he noticed that her hands were perfectly steady despite the hours of physical punishment she had just endured. He needed to see that I will not break. Now he knows. And what happens now? Oduya straightened and looked toward the administrative building where Hargrave had disappeared. "Now he gets desperate," she said. "Desperate men make mistakes." She was right. By noon, rumors were circulating that Lieutenant Commander Hargrave had filed a formal complaint against Petty Officer Oduya for insubordination. The specific charges were vague, Something about disrespecting a superior officer and failure to follow proper protocol. Everyone who had witnessed the evaluation knew the charges were fabricated, but knowing and proving were different things. Fong found her in the equipment shed that afternoon, methodically inventorying supplies as if nothing unusual had happened. "They're saying he filed charges against you," Fong said, his young face tight with anger. "That is not right. Everyone saw what happened. He is the one who should be charged." Oduya continued her inventory without looking up. "What people see and what people are willing to testify to are rarely the same thing," she said. "I would testify," Fong insisted. "I saw him hit you yesterday. I saw the evaluation today. I would tell the truth." Now, she did look up, and something in her expression made Fong take a half step back. It was not anger. It was something closer to assessment, as if she were measuring him against some internal standard. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because you helped me when you did not have to. Because someone should stand up to men like him." A long moment passed. Then Oduya nodded slowly. "Keep your head down for now," she said. "When the time comes, I will remember what you offered." She returned to her inventory, and Fong understood he had been dismissed. But as he walked away, he could not shake the feeling that he had just made a commitment to something much larger than a simple complaint about an abusive officer. That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific and painted the base in shades of gold and crimson, Oduya received a summons to report to Captain Alderman's office the following morning. The formal complaint had been processed with unusual speed, which meant Hargrave had called in favors. She read the summons twice, then folded it and placed it in her pocket. Across the base, she knew Hargrave was probably celebrating, confident that his connections would crush her the way they had crushed others before. He did not know that she had connections of her own. He did not know that somewhere in the Pentagon, there were people who remembered what really happened 7 years ago in a valley that did not appear on any official map. He did not know that the woman he was trying to destroy had spent years learning to be patient, to wait, to let her enemies defeat themselves. And he certainly did not know that his own father's secrets were about to become the weapon that brought everything crashing down. Captain Ruth Alderman had commanded Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for 3 years, and in that time, she had developed a finely tuned instinct for trouble. The woman standing at attention in her office triggered every alarm that instinct possessed. "At ease, Petty Officer," Alderman said, settling in her chair and studying the file open on her desk. The file that contained formal charges of insubordination filed by Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave. The file that did not match the woman standing before her in any way she could articulate. Oduya shifted to parade rest, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes focused on a point just above the captain's head. She had the stillness of someone accustomed to waiting, the kind of patience that came from training most sailors never received. "Lieutenant Commander Hargrave has filed serious charges against you," Alderman continued. "He claims you have repeatedly demonstrated disrespect towards superior officers and failed to follow lawful orders. He is requesting immediate reassignment and a formal reprimand in your permanent record." "Yes, ma'am," Oduya replied. Her voice betrayed nothing. Alderman leaned back in her chair. "I've been doing this job for a long time," she said. "Long enough to know when something does not add up. Your service record is exemplary. Your fitness reports from previous commands are outstanding. And yet Lieutenant Commander Hargrave would have me believe you are a discipline problem." She paused, waiting for a response. Oduya offered none. "I have also heard," Alderman continued carefully, "certain rumors about an incident 2 days ago. An incident involving physical contact between yourself and the lieutenant commander." Something flickered in Oduya's eyes. It was there and gone so quickly that Alderman almost missed it. "I'm not aware of any such incident, ma'am," Oduya said. Alderman studied her for a long moment. She had spent 20 years learning to read people, and the woman before her was one of the most unreadable she had ever encountered. There was something beneath that calm surface, something coiled and waiting, but Alderman could not quite grasp what it was. "Very well," she said finally. "I am placing these charges under review pending further investigation." You will continue your regular duties until a determination is made. Dismissed. Oduya saluted crisply and turned to leave. She was almost at the door when Alderman spoke again. Petty officer. One more thing. Oduya stopped but did not turn around. Your file has some interesting gaps in it, Alderman said quietly. Sections that are classified above my clearance level. I have put in a request for more information. She paused. I suspect what comes back will be very enlightening. Oduya remained motionless for a heartbeat. Then she walked out without a word. Outside the administrative building, Chief Slade was waiting. He fell in a step beside her as she walked toward the training compound, his face grim. How'd it go? He asked. The charges are under review, Oduya replied. She is requesting my full file. Slade exhaled slowly. That could be good or bad. It depends on how much she is allowed to see. They walked in silence for a moment, passing groups of sailors who gave Oduya curious glances. Word of her performance at the physical evaluation had spread, and the quiet woman who had been invisible for 3 months was suddenly the subject of intense speculation. I have been asking around, Slade said, lowering his voice. About Hargrave. About his history. He has done this before, you know. Targeted people. Destroyed careers. There was a chief petty officer at his last command who filed a complaint against him. She was transferred within a week and discharged within 6 months. Medical separation, officially. Unofficially, she had a breakdown after months of harassment no one would acknowledge. Oduya absorbed this information without visible reaction. His father protects him, she said. It was not a question. Rear Admiral Theodore Hargrave, Slade confirmed. Retired now, but still connected. Still powerful. The kind of man who can make phone calls and change the course of careers with a single conversation. They had reached the equipment shed, and Oduya stopped walking. She turned to face Slade directly, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw something other than careful control in her expression. He saw cold, purposeful anger. Let me tell you something about Rear Admiral Hargrave, she said quietly. 7 years ago, he authorized an intelligence assessment that sent 8 people into a valley in a country that does not officially exist. The intelligence was flawed. He knew it was flawed. He sent them anyway because admitting the flaw would have damaged his career. Slade felt his stomach drop. What happened? He asked, though part of him already knew. 7 of them died, Oduya said. The 8th one did not. She held his gaze until understanding dawned in his eyes. You, he breathed. Me, she confirmed. And now his son is trying to destroy me before I can ever tell anyone what really happened. She paused. But he does not know that I am not here to talk. I am here to prove. Before Slade could respond, movement caught his eye. Across the compound, a figure was watching them. A woman in the uniform of a Master Chief, silver hair cropped short, standing perfectly still in the shadow of the communications building. Who is that? Slade asked. Oduya glanced over her shoulder, and for just a moment, something that might have been relief crossed her face. That, she said, is someone I have not seen in a very long time. Someone who knows exactly what I am and what I can do. She turned back to Slade. Things are about to get complicated, Chief. I need to know if you are with me. Slade thought about everything he had seen in the past 3 days. The slap that had not made her flinch. The evaluation that should have broken her. The classified file with its redacted secrets. And now this. The revelation that the quiet woman he had been supervising was at the center of something far larger than he had imagined. He thought about the Chief Petty Officer Hargrave had destroyed, about all the others who had probably suffered the same fate, about the kind of Navy he wanted to serve in and the kind of officers he wanted to see leading it. I am with you, he said. Oduya nodded once, then walked toward the watching figure. Slade stayed where he was, understanding that this was a conversation he was not meant to hear. But as he watched the 2 women meet, he could not shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something that would change everything he thought he knew about justice, loyalty, and the true cost of speaking truth to power. Master Chief Elena Vance had the kind of face that revealed nothing and eyes that saw everything. She stood in the shadow of the communications building with her arms crossed, watching Oduya approach with an expression that might have been carved from granite. Kestrel, she said when Oduya reached her. The name sounded strange after so many months of ranks and surnames. Master Chief, Oduya replied. It has been a long time. For years, Vance said. Since the debrief. Since they made us sign papers swearing we would never speak about what happened in that valley. She paused. You look tired. I'm fine. No, you're not. Vance uncrossed her arms and took a step closer, lowering her voice. I have been watching you for 3 weeks. Ever since I heard you transferred here. I know what you were doing, and I know why you're doing it. But you need to understand something. The Hargraves are not people you can take down alone. Oduya met her gaze steadily. I'm not alone. I have evidence. I have witnesses who are willing to talk. You have a chief petty officer who just learned the truth 5 minutes ago, and a seaman apprentice who does not understand what he is getting into. Vance shook her head. That is not enough. Not against a family with connections in every corner of the Pentagon. Then why are you here? The question hung in the air between them. Vance was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its hardness. Because I was there too, she said quietly. Because I read those same flawed intelligence reports, and I knew something was wrong, and I did not push hard enough. Because 7 people who trusted me are dead, and I have spent 7 years trying to live with that. She paused. And because when I heard Vincent Hargrave hit you in front of 20 witnesses, and you did not even flinch, I knew you were ready to finish what we should have started years ago. Oduya felt something shift in her chest. For 7 years she had carried this burden alone, convinced that no one else remembered, that no one else cared. Now, standing in the California sun with a woman who shared her ghosts, she realized how heavy that loneliness had become. The investigation into my charges is ongoing, Oduya said. Captain Alderman is requesting my full file. If she sees the right things, she might start asking the right questions. And if Hargrave gets to her first, then we find another way. Vance studied her for a long moment. There is something you should know, she said finally. Something I learned last night, through channels I am not supposed to have anymore. Vincent Hargrave made a phone call yesterday. To his father. Oduya felt her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. What did they discuss? You. Specifically, they discussed making sure the investigation into your charges moves quickly and ends badly. Vance paused. They are scared, Kestrel. They know who you are, and they know what you might have. That makes them dangerous. That night, alone in her quarters, Oduya allowed herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. The charges hanging over her head. The Hargraves mobilizing their connections against her. The years of silence and patience that might all be for nothing if she could not find a way to break through. She pulled out the photograph again. 8 faces stared back at her from a desert that existed only in classified files and nightmares. Marcus with his too wide smile. Chun with her serious eyes. Kowalski, Thompson, Reyes, Baxter, and Williams. Her team. Her family. The people she had failed to save. The mission had been doomed from the start. Intelligence suggested a small enemy force in the valley, maybe 20 fighters with outdated weapons. The reality had been over 100 well-armed combatants with support positions in the surrounding hills. An ambush designed to destroy exactly the kind of team that had walked into it. She remembered the moment she realized the intelligence was wrong. The first shots coming from positions that should have been empty. The chaos of the firefight, bodies falling around her, the screaming and the blood and the desperate retreat that only she had survived. She remembered the debrief afterward. The rear admiral with cold eyes telling her that what happened in that valley would never be spoken of again. The implied threats. The transfer to a desk job far from anything operational. The years of watching Theodore Hargrave retire with honors while her teammates rotted in graves their families could never visit. And she remembered the promise she had made to herself as she signed those papers. That someday, somehow, she would make sure the truth came out. That the men and women who died following flawed orders would be remembered as heroes instead of statistics. A knock at her door pulled her from her memories. She opened it to find Fong standing in the corridor, his young face pale with worry. Petty Officer Oduya, he said, I need to tell you something. I was working late in the communications center tonight, and I heard Lieutenant Commander Hargrave making a call. He did not know I was there. What did you hear, Oduya asked. Fong swallowed hard. He was talking to someone about you. He said the court-martial would be scheduled within the week. He said by the time anyone figured out what was really happening, you would already be discharged and discredited. He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. And he said something else. He said his father wanted to make sure you never got the chance to talk to anyone who mattered. Oduya absorbed this information with the same preternatural calm she had shown when Hargrave struck her. But inside, something cold and determined was crystallizing. They were accelerating their timeline. That meant they were afraid. And afraid men made mistakes. Thank you for telling me this, she said to Fong. You took a risk. What are you going to do, he asked. Oduya looked past him, toward the window where the lights of the base glittered against the dark Pacific sky. She thought about Marcus and his too wide smile. She thought about the 7 graves that bore no names. She thought about the little girl she had once been, growing up in Oakland with dreams of serving her country with honor. Why should I have done years ago, she said quietly. Fight back. The next morning brought fog so thick that the base seemed to exist in its own isolated world, cut off from everything beyond the gray wall of moisture that swallowed buildings and blurred edges. Oduya moved through it like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the wet concrete, her mind working through possibilities and contingencies the way it had been trained to do years ago in places far more dangerous than this. She found Master Chief Vance waiting at the waterfront, standing at the edge of a pier that jutted out into the invisible Pacific. The older woman did not turn as Oduya approached, her eyes fixed on the place where the water disappeared into nothingness. I made some calls last night, Vance said, to people I trust, people who were there when Theodore Hargrave gave those orders 7 years ago. And Vance turned to face her, and Oduya saw something in her expression that had not been there before. A spark of something that looked almost like hope. There's a paper trail, Vance said. The original intelligence assessments, the ones that showed the real enemy strength in that valley. Hargrave buried them, but he did not destroy them. He could not, because destroying classified documents would have created its own problems. So he had them sealed and filed in a records facility in Maryland. Oduya felt her heart rate increase slightly. That was more than she had dared to hope for. Can we access them? Not directly. The classification level is beyond anything either of us can touch. But there is someone who might be able to help. Vance paused. Commander James Whitfield. He was the intelligence officer who prepared those original assessments. The ones Hargrave ignored. I remember the name. Oduya said slowly. He was transferred immediately after the mission. I assumed he had been silenced like the rest of us. He was. But unlike the rest of us, Whitfield kept copies. Unofficial backups that he was never supposed to have. He has been sitting on them for 7 years, waiting for someone to come forward, waiting for a chance to tell the truth. The fog seemed to press closer around them, muffling the sounds of the base, creating a pocket of privacy in the middle of a military installation with thousands of eyes. There is something else, Vance continued. Something I learned this morning that changes everything. Oduya waited. Vincent Hargrave, Vance said carefully. He was not always stationed at Coronado. 5 years ago, he was assigned to the Pentagon, to his father's staff. She paused, letting the implications sink in. He was there when the files were sealed. He was there when the cover story was finalized. He knows exactly what his father did, and he has been helping hide it ever since. The revelation hit Oduya like a physical blow. For months, she had assumed Vincent Hargrave was simply a petty tyrant with a powerful father, a bully who targeted her because she was convenient. Now she understood the truth. He had known who she was from the moment she arrived. He had requested her transfer specifically. Everything he had done, the harassment, the slap, the false charges, had been part of a deliberate campaign to destroy her before she could threaten his family secrets. He's been hunting me, she said quietly. This whole time. Vance nodded. And now you understand why they're so desperate to push through the court-martial. It is not about insubordination. It is about silencing you permanently. A dishonorable discharge would destroy your credibility. Anything you said afterward will be dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced sailor with a grudge. Odia stood very still, processing this new information, fitting it into the picture she had been assembling for 7 years. The picture was almost complete now. She could see the shape of it, the conspiracy of silence that had protected the Hargraves while her teammates lay in unmarked graves. "Commander Whitfield," she said. "Where is he now?" "He retired 2 years ago. Lives in San Diego, about 30 minutes from here." Vance reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. "I have his address. He's expecting a call." Oduya took the paper and looked at it for a long moment. A name, an address, a phone number. Such simple things to carry the weight of so much. "If I contact him," she said slowly, "if we start moving forward with this, there is no going back. The Hargraves will know. They will escalate." "They are already escalating," Vance replied. "The court-martial is in 5 days. If we do not act now, you will be discharged before the week is out, and everything we've been carrying for 7 years will be buried forever." The fog was beginning to thin, pale sunlight filtering through the gray. Somewhere on the base, sailors were waking up, beginning their routines, unaware of the storm that was building in their midst. "I need to tell Chief Slade," Oduya said, "and Fong. If we are doing this, they need to understand what they are getting into." Vance nodded. "I will reach out to some others. People who remember what really happened. People who have been waiting for someone brave enough to speak first." She paused. "You're not alone in this, Kestrel. You never were. We were just all too afraid to stand up until you showed us how." Odia thought about the slap that had echoed across the training compound, the moment that had started everything. She had not flinched because she had learned long ago that pain was temporary and fear was a choice. But more than that, she had not flinched because she had been waiting for exactly that moment. Waiting for Hargrave to make a mistake that could not be hidden. Now that mistake was going to cost him everything. "I will call Whitfield tonight," she said. "Set up a meeting for tomorrow. We have 5 days to gather enough evidence to stop a court-martial and expose a 7-year cover-up." Vance allowed herself a small smile, the first Oduya had ever seen from her. "Then we had better get started," she said. They walked back toward the base together, 2 women who had survived something that should have broken them, finally ready to tell the truth. Behind them, the fog continued to lift, revealing a sky that was slowly turning blue. It felt like an omen. Or maybe, Oduya thought, it was just the world finally deciding to let in the light. Commander James Whitfield lived in a modest house in the hills above San Diego, the kind of place a man retreats to when he wants to disappear from the world he once served. Oduya arrived at 1900 hours, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of amber and violet behind her. She had changed into civilian clothes, a simple arrangement that made her look like any other young woman visiting a retired neighbor. Whitfield opened the door before she could knock. He was older than she expected, his hair gone completely white, his face lined with the particular weariness of someone who has carried a heavy secret for too long. But his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at her, she saw recognition flicker across his features. "Petty Officer Oduya," he said quietly. "I have been waiting 7 years for someone to knock on this door." The inside of the house was cluttered with books and papers, the organized chaos of an intelligence officer who never quite stopped analyzing the world around him. Whitfield led her to a small study at the back, where a single lamp cast warm light across a desk covered in folders and photographs. "I know why you are here," he said, lowering himself into a worn leather chair. "Elena Vance called me this morning. She told me about the court-martial, about Vincent Hargrave." He shook his head slowly. "I should have come forward years ago. I knew what Theodore Hargrave did. I knew he buried my assessments and sent your team into that valley knowing they would be outnumbered 5-1. Why did you not speak?" Oduya asked. There was no accusation in her voice, only a genuine desire to understand. Whitfield was silent for a long moment. "Because I was afraid," he said finally. "Because Theodore Hargrave made it very clear what would happen to my family if I ever breathed a word. He had photographs of my daughter at her school, my wife at her office. He never made explicit threats, but the message was unmistakable." He paused. "I told myself I was protecting them. But the truth is, I was a coward. Oduya leaned forward. Do you still have the documents? The original intelligence assessments? In answer, Whitfield reached into his desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it in his hands for a moment, staring at it, as if it contained something dangerous, which Oduya supposed it did. Everything is here, he said. The satellite imagery showing the true enemy positions. The intercepted communications that revealed their numbers. My assessment recommending the mission be scrapped or reinforced. And Theodore Hargrave's signature on the order that sent your team in any way. He placed the envelope on the desk between them. I have carried this for 7 years. I am ready to let it go. Oduya reached for the envelope, then stopped. If we use this, she said carefully, your name will be attached to it. The Hargraves will come after you the way they are coming after me. I know, Whitfield said, but I'm old now, and my wife passed 3 years ago, and my daughter is grown with a family of her own. He managed a small smile. I have spent 7 years living with the ghosts of the people who died because I stayed silent. It is time to give them peace. Oduya took the envelope. The weight of it seemed far greater than the paper it contained. There is something else, Whitfield continued. Something Elena does not know. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Vincent Hargrave did not just help his father cover up the mission. He was the one who identified your team as a threat in the first place. He was a junior intelligence officer at the time, assigned to monitor potential whistleblowers. He flagged your team leader, Marcus Cole, as someone who might talk. The mission was not just about flawed intelligence. It was about eliminating people who knew too much. The words hit Oduya like bullets, each one finding its mark in the part of her that had never stopped grieving. Marcus with his too wide smile. Marcus who had talked about writing a book someday, about telling the truth about the wars no one back home understood. Marcus who had died in her arms in a valley that should never have been a battlefield. They killed them on purpose, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I cannot prove that, Whitfield replied carefully. The official mission parameters were legitimate, even if the intelligence was wrong. But the timing, the targeting, the way certain people were selected for that team. He shook his head. I have spent 7 years analyzing it. The pattern is there, even if the proof is not. Oduya sat in silence, holding the envelope that contained the evidence she had spent years searching for. It was enough to destroy careers, to reopen investigations, to finally give her fallen teammates the recognition they deserved. But it was not enough to prove murder. Some justice, she realized, would have to remain beyond her reach. Thank you, she said finally, for keeping this, for being willing to come forward now. Whitfield nodded slowly. What will you do next? I have 4 days before the court-martial. Oduya stood, tucking the envelope inside her jacket. I need to get this evidence to Captain Alderman in a way that cannot be ignored or buried. I need witnesses who are willing to testify. And I need to be ready for whatever the Hargraves throw at me when they realize what is happening. They will fight, Whitfield warned. They have too much to lose. So do I, Oduya replied. She paused at the door, looking back at the old man in his cluttered study. I stopped being afraid of them a long time ago. About 7 years ago, in fact. In a valley where I watched 7 people die and promised myself that someday someone would know the truth. She walked out into the evening air, the envelope pressed against her chest like a shield. Above her, the first stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, she liked to think, Marcus and the others were watching. Hold on, she thought. We're almost there. The call came at 0300, dragging Oduya from a sleep she had not expected to find. She answered on the second ring, her voice clear and alert despite the hour. They know, Chief Slade said without preamble. His voice was tight, with barely controlled urgency. I do not know how, but they know about Whitfield. Hargrave has called an emergency tactical demonstration for tomorrow morning. Full unit participation. He specifically requested that you be included in the hand-to-hand combat evaluation. Oduya sat up in her rack, her mind already racing through implications. A hand-to-hand evaluation meant close-quarters contact. It meant Hargrave would have an excuse to put his hands on her again, this time in a controlled environment where any injury could be dismissed as training accident. Who authorized it, she asked. Captain Alderman signed off on it an hour ago. Slade paused. But here's the thing. She also moved up her review of your file. She's been in her office all night, making calls to people with clearances I did not even know existed. She is suspicious. She is more than suspicious. I think she knows something is wrong with the official story. But Hargrave is pushing hard for this demonstration, and she cannot refuse without tipping her hand. Odia was already on her feet, moving through her quarters with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to prepare for combat in the dark. The envelope from Whitfield was hidden beneath the false panel in her locker. The evidence that could destroy the Hargraves was 20 feet away, and she had less than 6 hours before she would face Vincent Hargrave in a situation designed to break her. I need you to do something for me, she said. The evidence I gathered. If something happens to me tomorrow, it needs to reach Captain Alderman directly. Can you make sure of that? Slade was quiet for a moment. You think he would actually hurt you? In front of the whole unit? I think he is desperate, Oduya replied. And desperate men do not think about consequences. They think about survival. The hours before dawn passed slowly. Oduya spent them preparing, not just physically but mentally, running through scenarios and responses the way she had been trained to do in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. By the time the first gray light began to seep through her window, she was ready. The demonstration was scheduled for 0700 on the main training field. When Odia arrived, she found nearly 100 sailors already assembled, far more than a routine evaluation would require. Word had spread. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when Lieutenant Commander Hargrave faced the woman he had been trying to destroy. Hargrave stood at the center of the field, wearing combat training gear and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Behind him, a group of visiting officers sat in folding chairs, brass from commands across the region who had been invited to observe. The presence of so many witnesses should have made Oduya feel safer. Instead, it made her more wary. Hargrave would not have arranged an audience unless he was certain of the outcome. Master Chief Vance caught her eye from the edge of the crowd. The older woman gave a single small nod, a gesture of support that steadied something inside Oduya. Whatever happened in the next hour, she was not alone. Petty Officer Oduya, Hargrave called out, his voice carrying across the field. You have been selected to demonstrate defensive techniques against a superior opponent. Step forward. She walked to the center of the field, feeling the weight of 100 stares. The morning air was cool against her skin, carrying the salt smell of the Pacific and the distant cry of gulls. It was a beautiful morning. Strange, she thought, how the most significant moments so often arrived wrapped in ordinary details. Hargrave circled her slowly, playing to the crowd. The purpose of this demonstration, he announced, is to assess combat readiness under pressure. Petty Officer Oduya will defend against standard attack patterns while I evaluate her technique. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the hatred burning behind his professional mask. Close enough that his next words reached only her ears. I know about Whitfield, he breathed. I know about the documents. And when this demonstration is over, you are going to have an accident that ends your career and your credibility. No one will believe a word you say after I am done with you. Oduya met his gaze without flinching. The same stillness that had unnerved him after the slap settled over her now, a calm so complete it seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond ordinary human composure. You talk too much, she said quietly. It is a weakness. Rage flashed across Hargrave's face. He stepped back and raised his voice for the audience. Begin. He came at her fast, faster than a training demonstration required. His first strike aimed at her face with force intended to injure. The watching sailors gasped. This was not evaluation. This was assault dressed in the clothes of instruction. But Oduya was no longer there. She moved like water, like smoke, like something that existed between the spaces where Hargrave's fists sought to land. Every strike he threw found empty air. Every grab closed on nothing. She did not attack, did not retaliate, simply flowed around his increasingly desperate attempts to connect. The crowd fell silent. Even the visiting brass leaned forward in their chairs, recognizing that what they were witnessing was not standard defensive technique. It was something else entirely, something that spoke of training far beyond what any intelligence specialist should possess. Hargrave was breathing hard now, his face flushed with exertion and fury. He had expected to dominate her, to hurt her, to prove once and for all that she was nothing. Instead, he was being humiliated in front of every sailor on the base. "Stay still," he snarled, throwing a combination that would have broken bones if it had landed. Odia sidestepped the final blow and spoke loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Is this what you call an evaluation, sir? Or is this what you did to Chief Morrison at your last command before she had her breakdown?" The words hit Hargrave like a physical blow. He froze for just a moment, his eyes widening with shock that she knew about his previous victim. And in that moment of hesitation, everything changed. Because Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave, son of a rear admiral, man who had never faced real consequences in his entire privileged life, made the worst decision of his career. He abandoned all pretense of evaluation and attacked her with genuine intent to harm, in full view of 100 witnesses and a row of senior officers. And Kestrel Odia, who had spent 6 years as one of the most highly trained combat operatives in the United States military, finally stopped running. What happened next will be talked about on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for years to come. Sailors who witnessed it would tell the story to their children. Officers who sat in those folding chairs would reference it in lectures about the dangers of underestimating an opponent. And Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hargrave would spend the rest of his life trying to forget the 30 seconds that destroyed everything he thought he knew about power. He charged at her with his full weight behind the attack, a haymaker punch designed to end the fight and her career in a single blow. It was the kind of strike that worked against people who froze under pressure, against victims who had been conditioned to accept abuse. Kestrel Odia was neither of those things. She moved inside his reach before the punch could develop full momentum, her body flowing through a technique that most of the watching sailors had never seen outside of classified training videos. Her hands found pressure points with surgical precision. Her feet swept his base out from under him with a motion so smooth it looked almost gentle. And then Vincent Hargrave, who had spent 3 months trying to break the quiet woman from intelligence, found himself face down on the training field with his arm locked behind his back and her knee pressed against his spine. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Silence blanketed the field. 100 sailors stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The visiting brass rose from their chairs almost in unison, their faces showing various shades of shock and sudden understanding. Odia held the position for a moment, ensuring that everyone present had time to see exactly how thoroughly she had dominated the encounter. Then she leaned close to Hargrave's ear and spoke words that only he could hear. "That valley 7 years ago," she said quietly. "The one where your father sent my team to die. I was the point operator. I killed 37 enemy combatants during the retreat. I carried Marcus Cole's body for 6 miles through hostile territory before the extraction arrived." She paused. "You never had a chance against me. You just did not know it." She released him and stepped back, assuming a position of parade rest, as if nothing unusual had happened. Hargrave scrambled to his feet, his face purple with humiliation and rage, his eyes wild with the particular madness of a man watching his entire world collapse. He sputtered. "You assaulted a superior officer. You will be court-martialed. You will be destroyed." "I defended myself against an unprovoked attack," Odia replied calmly, in front of approximately 100 witnesses. She tilted her head slightly, including Captain Alderman, who appears to have just arrived. Hargrave spun to find the base commander standing at the edge of the field, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp with calculation. Beside her stood Master Chief Vance and a man in civilian clothes that Hargrave did not recognize, but Odia did. Commander Whitfield had come to watch justice begin. Captain Alderman stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the crowd. "This demonstration is concluded," she announced. "Lieutenant Commander Hargrave, You will report to my office immediately." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled sailors. Everyone else is dismissed. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly, with backward glances at the woman who had just revealed herself to be something far more than anyone had suspected. Seaman Fong caught Odia's eye as he passed, his young face alight with something between admiration and awe. Chief Slade nodded once, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. Hargrave had not moved. He stood in the center of the field, his training gear disheveled, his pride shattered, staring at Oduya as if seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he demanded. The arrogance was gone from his voice, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Oduya met his gaze with the same calm she had shown when he slapped her 5 days ago. "I am Petty Officer First Class Kestrel Oduya," she said, "officially assigned to intelligence support." She paused. "Unofficially, I'm one of the first women to complete BUD/S training and serve in an operational SEAL team. I'm the sole survivor of Operation Fallen Eagle, the mission your father sent into that valley knowing the intelligence was flawed. And I am the person who has spent 7 years gathering evidence of what really happened to my teammates." Hargrave's face went pale. "You cannot prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," Captain Alderman said, stepping closer, "I believe she can. I received some very interesting documents this morning. Documents that were hand-delivered to my office by Commander Whitfield, along with his sworn statement about the events leading up to Operation Fallen Eagle." She fixed Hargrave with a look that promised no mercy. "Your father's signature is on orders that directly contradict the official intelligence assessments. Orders that sent 8 people to their deaths. My father is a hero," Hargrave protested weakly. "He served this country for 30 years. Your father is a liar who murdered my team," Oduya said quietly. "And you helped him cover it up." She stepped closer to him, and for the first time, Vincent Hargrave flinched away from her. The harassment, the slap, the false charges, the attempt to have me court-martialed. It was all designed to discredit me before I could tell anyone what really happened. Captain Alderman raised her hand, cutting off whatever response Hargrave might have attempted. "This matter is now under formal investigation," she said. "Lieutenant Commander Hargrave, you are relieved of duty pending the outcome. You will surrender your credentials and confine yourself to quarters until further notice." 2 military police officers appeared at the edge of the field, summoned by some signal Oduya had not seen. They flanked Hargrave and escorted him away, his shoulders slumped, his stride unsteady, the picture of a man whose carefully constructed world had just crumbled to dust. Oduya watched him go, feeling something she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness and the faint stirring of something that might someday become peace. It was not over. There would be investigations and hearings and difficult conversations with people who had power and did not want to give it up. But for the first time in 7 years, the truth was no longer buried. For the first time since that valley, the dead had a voice, and she had given it to them. The hours following the demonstration moved with a strange rhythm, fast and slow at the same time, as if the universe itself was trying to catch up with everything that had changed. Oduya spent most of the day in Captain Alderman's office, providing statements, answering questions, watching the careful machinery of military justice begin to turn in a direction it had been avoiding for 7 years. Commander Whitfield's documents spread across the captain's desk like pieces of a puzzle finally assembled. Satellite imagery showing enemy positions the original intelligence had missed. Intercepted communications revealing troop numbers that should have scrubbed the mission entirely. Assessment after assessment recommending delay or reinforcement, each one bearing Theodore Hargrave's dismissive initials and the date he had chosen to ignore them. And, at the center of it all, the mission order itself. Operation Fallen Eagle. 8 names listed under personnel deployment. 7 of them now carved into headstones that bore no indication of how they really died. "This is damning," Captain Alderman said quietly, setting down the final document. She looked at Oduya with something that might have been respect, might have been sorrow. "How long have you been carrying this?" "7 years," Oduya replied. "Since the day I walked out of that valley alone." Alderman was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. "This is Captain Ruth Alderman, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado," she said when the line connected. "I need to speak with the Inspector General's office immediately. We have a situation involving falsified intelligence, command misconduct, and potential negligent homicide at flag officer level." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war, which Oduya supposed they were. By evening, the base was swarming with investigators from commands Oduya had never heard of. Men and women in uniforms and suits, carrying briefcases and recorders, asking questions with a focused intensity of people who sensed that something significant had finally broken loose. Master Chief Vance coordinated witness interviews, while Chief Slade ensured that everyone who had seen the demonstration was available to provide statements. Seaman Fong found Oduya outside the administrative building as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. "Is it true," he asked, "what they're saying about you? That you were a SEAL? That you completed BUD/S?" Oduya looked at him, this young sailor who had risked his nascent career to tell her about a phone call he was never supposed to hear. "Yes," she said simply. "It is true." Fong shook his head slowly, wonder written across his features. "That morning when you helped me with the rigging, you could have done it in your sleep. You did not need to show me anything." "No," Oduya agreed, "but you needed to learn. And sometimes the most important thing a person can do is help someone else find their footing." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he straightened slightly, squaring his shoulders in a way that made him look older than his 19 years. "What you did today," he said, standing up to him like that, letting everyone see the truth. He paused, searching for the right words. "I want to be that kind of sailor someday. The kind who does the right thing even when it costs everything." Oduya felt something warm kindle in her chest, a small flame in the darkness she had carried for so long. "You already are," she said. "You proved that when you came to my door." Before Fong could respond, a commotion near the main gate drew their attention. A black sedan had pulled up, and a figure was emerging from a back seat with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Even from a distance, Oduya recognized the silver eagles on his shoulders, the rigid posture, the cold fury in every line of his body. Rear Admiral Theodore Hargrave had come to Coronado. He strode across the base like he still owned it, his presence parting the gathered personnel like a ship cutting through waves. Investigators paused in their work. Sailors stopped mid-conversation. Even Captain Alderman, emerging from her office to meet him, seemed momentarily taken aback by the sheer force of his arrival. Oduya did not move. She stood exactly where she was, watching the man who had sent her teammates to die finally enter the arena where his sins would be judged. Hargrave spotted her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something darker. Hatred, certainly, but beneath that, buried deep where he probably thought no one could see it, she saw fear. He knew. He knew that the walls he had built around his secrets were crumbling. He knew that the woman he had tried to bury was still standing. And he knew, with the instinct of a predator recognizing another predator, that she was not afraid of him. Captain Alderman intercepted him before he could approach further. "Admiral Hargrave," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "You are not authorized to be on this installation during an active investigation. I must ask you to leave immediately." "I am a flag officer in the United States Navy," Hargrave thundered. "I will not be barred from any installation I choose to visit." "You are a retired flag officer who is now the subject of a formal inquiry," Alderman replied calmly. "Your presence here constitutes potential witness tampering. If you do not leave voluntarily, I will have you escorted off base." The silence that followed was absolute. 100 people held their breath, watching a confrontation that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. A captain facing down an admiral. Truth facing down power. Everything the Hargraves had built balanced on the edge of a knife. Theodore Hargrave looked past Alderman to where Oduya stood. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only those closest could hear, but the words carried weight like stones. "This is not over," he said. Oduya met his gaze without flinching, the same way she had met his son's hand without flinching, the same way she had met every challenge the world had thrown at her since a valley filled with blood and broken promises. "No," she agreed. "It is not, but it will be." She watched him turn and walk back to his sedan, watched the taillights disappear through the gate, watched the last rays of sunlight fade into twilight. Behind her, the investigation continued. Around her, sailors whispered about what they had witnessed. And inside her, for the first time in 7 years, something that felt like hope began to grow. Theodore Hargrave's counterattack came swiftly and from multiple directions at once. Within 48 hours of his visit to Coronado, phone calls had been made to congressional offices. Media contacts had been fed stories about a disgruntled sailor making false accusations, and lawyers had begun filing motions to seal the investigation on grounds of national security. It was, Oduya had to admit, an impressive display of the power that had kept him untouchable for so long. But power, she had learned, was only as strong as the foundations it rested upon. And Theodore Hargrave's foundations had been crumbling for 7 years without him knowing it. The break came on the 3rd day, when a retired master sergeant named Dolores Washington walked into Captain Alderman's office with a box of documents she had been hiding since Operation Fallen Eagle. Washington had been the administrative assistant to the Intelligence Division during the mission planning phase. She had seen the original assessments. She had watched Hargrave dismiss them, and she had quietly made copies of everything before the files were sealed. "I always knew this day would come," Washington told them, her weathered hands steady as she laid out paper after paper. "I just did not know who would be brave enough to start it." She looked at Oduya with eyes that held decades of quiet resistance. "Well, I heard what you did on that training field. I knew it was time." Washington's documents filled gaps that Whitfield's could not. Internal memos discussing how to spin the mission failure. Email chains showing the pressure applied to investigating officers. Performance reviews that had been altered to discredit anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. But the most damning piece was a recording. Washington had kept an old cassette tape, the kind that seemed almost quaint in the digital age, containing a conversation between Theodore Hargrave and his chief of staff the day after the mission failed. The audio quality was poor, scratchy with age and the limitations of the technology. But the words were clear enough. Those SEALs were asking too many questions, Hargrave's voice said through the static. Cole, especially. He was talking about writing reports, go to oversight committees. This mission solved that problem permanently. There was a pause on the tape, then another voice. "And if anyone investigates?" "They will not," Hargrave replied. "I have made sure of that. The intelligence failure narrative is airtight. No one will ever know those assessments existed." The recording ended with a click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of Captain Alderman's office. Oduya sat very still, feeling the weight of what she had just heard settle into her bones. For 7 years, she had suspected. For 7 years, she had gathered evidence of negligence and cover-up. But this was something else entirely. This was proof that Theodore Hargrave had deliberately sent her team into an ambush to silence them. This was proof of murder. Captain Alderman reached for her phone with hands that trembled slightly. "I need to make some calls," she said quietly. "This has just become a matter for the Judge Advocate General and the Department of Defense Inspector General." She looked at Oduya, and possibly the Department of Justice. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity that Oduya observed more than participated in. Federal investigators arrived from Washington. Military lawyers convened in conference rooms that had been hastily secured. News began to leak despite efforts at containment, and reporters gathered outside the base gates like sharks, scenting blood in the water. Through it all, Oduya found herself returning again and again to the waterfront where she had first spoken with Master Chief Vance. The Pacific stretched endlessly before her, gray and vast and indifferent to human concerns. She found comfort in that indifference. The ocean did not care about admirals or cover-ups or 7-year quests for justice. It simply existed, constant and eternal, a reminder that some things were larger than any single story. Vance found her there on the evening before the formal charges were announced. "They're going to arrest him," Vance said, coming to stand beside her. "Theodore Hargrave. Federal marshals will take him into custody tomorrow morning." Her voice carried a note of wonder, as if she still could not quite believe it. "His son is cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced charges." Apparently, Vincent decided his father's legacy was not worth spending the rest of his life in prison for. Odia absorbed this information without reaction. She had expected something like this. Men like Vincent Hargrave were bullies at heart, and bullies always collapsed when the pressure became real. "What about the others?" she asked. "The people who helped with the cover-up over the years. Some will face charges. Others will quietly retire. A few will probably escape accountability entirely." Vance shrugged slightly. "It is not perfect justice, but it is more than we had any right to expect a week ago." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky blazed with color, oranges and pinks and deep purples that seemed almost too vivid to be real. "I keep thinking about Marcus," Odia said finally. "About what he would say if he could see this." Vance considered the question. "I think he would say it took you long enough," she replied. "And then he would smile that ridiculous smile of his and tell you he never doubted you for a second." Oduya felt something crack inside her chest. A wall she had built so long ago she had forgotten it existed. Tears she had not shed in 7 years began to fall, silent and steady, dropping into the Pacific where they joined all the other sorrows the ocean had absorbed over millennia. Vance did not try to comfort her with words. She simply stood beside her, a steady presence in the gathering darkness, bearing witness to a grief that had finally found its release. When the tears stopped, Oduya wiped her face and took a deep breath of salt-tinged air. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Tomorrow we finish this." "Tomorrow," Vance agreed, "and then we figure out what comes next." The arrest of Rear Admiral Theodore Hargrave made national news. Camera crews captured the moment federal marshals escorted him from his Virginia home in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The man who had commanded fleets and shaped policy and sent young men and women to die with a signature now shuffled toward a waiting vehicle like any common criminal. Oduya watched the footage in Captain Alderman's office, surrounded by the people who had helped her reach this moment. Chief Slade stood near the door, his arms crossed, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Master Chief Vance sat in the corner, her expression unreadable, but her presence solid and reassuring. Commander Whitfield had returned to provide additional testimony, and even Seaman Fong had been allowed to attend, his young face solemn with the weight of what he was witnessing. The charges were extensive: negligent homicide, falsification of official documents, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States. Each count carried years of potential imprisonment, and prosecutors had made clear they intended to pursue the maximum sentences. Vincent Hargrave had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony against his father. He would serve time, but far less than he deserved. Oduya had made her peace with that compromise. Sometimes justice was imperfect. Sometimes you took what you could get and found a way to live with the rest. Captain Alderman muted the television as the coverage shifted to analysis and speculation. She turned to face the small group, her expression carrying a gravity that went beyond the moment. "I have some additional news," she said. "News that concerns you directly, Petty Officer Oduya." Oduya straightened slightly, preparing herself for whatever came next. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of your service and the revelations about Operation Fallen Eagle," Alderman continued, "the Navy has conducted a comprehensive review of your record. The classification restrictions that have hidden your achievements are being lifted." She paused. "Your SEAL qualification will be officially recognized. Your service record will reflect the truth of what you accomplished and what you survived." The words took a moment to penetrate. For 7 years, Oduya had existed in a strange limbo, her greatest achievements erased, her most painful memories denied. Now, finally, The woman she had been and the woman she had become would be united in a single official narrative. "There's more," Alderman said. "The families of your fallen teammates are being notified about the true circumstances of the mission. They will finally know that their loved ones died as heroes, not as casualties of routine intelligence failure." She met Oduya's eyes, and there will be a ceremony, a proper recognition of their sacrifice. "You have been asked to speak." Oduya felt the room blur slightly as tears threatened again. She blinked them back, steadying herself with a breath. "I would be honored," she said quietly. The ceremony took place 2 weeks later at Arlington National Cemetery, on a morning so clear and bright it seemed like the sky itself was paying respects. 7 headstones that had borne generic inscriptions for 7 years were being replaced with new markers that told the truth. Navy SEAL. Killed in action. Operation Fallen Eagle. Families gathered in small clusters, some weeping openly, others standing with the rigid composure of people who had learned to carry grief like a second skin. Oduya recognized faces from photographs Marcus had shown her, from stories Chun had told during long nights on deployment, from the brief glimpses of normal life her teammates had shared before that life was taken from them. She stood before them in her dress uniform, the trident pin now officially displayed on her chest, and spoke words she had been composing in her heart for 7 years. "They were the best of us," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Marcus Cole, who led with courage and kindness in equal measure. Jennifer Chun, whose brilliance saved lives more times than any report will ever capture. Kowalski, Thompson, Reyes, Baxter, and Williams. Each of them extraordinary. Each of them irreplaceable. Each of them taken too soon by decisions made by men who valued their own reputations more than the lives entrusted to their command. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "For 7 years, I have carried their memory alone. For 7 years, I have fought to ensure that their truth would not remain buried. Today, that fight is over. Today, the world knows what they gave and why they gave it. Today, they rest not as forgotten casualties, but as the heroes they always were." She looked out at the gathered families, at the faces of mothers and fathers and siblings and children who had mourned without understanding. "I cannot give them back to you," she said softly. "I wish with everything I am that I could. But I can promise you this. As long as I draw breath, their names will not be forgotten. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. And the lessons written in their blood will guide the next generation of warriors who follow in their footsteps." After the ceremony, Oduya lingered by Marcus's new headstone. The inscription read simply, "Lieutenant Marcus Cole, Navy SEAL, beloved leader, forever remembered." Chief Slade found her there as the crowd dispersed. "What will you do now?" he asked. Oduya considered the question. She had been offered reinstatement to an operational SEAL team. She had been offered positions in training commands, intelligence divisions, anywhere she wanted to go. The Navy that had once hidden her was now eager to claim her as their own. "I have been thinking about the next generation," she said finally. "About sailors like Fong who want to serve with honor, but need someone to show them the way." She looked at Slade. "I think I would like to teach. To train the ones who will carry this forward after we are gone." Slade nodded slowly. "You'll be good at that," he said. "You already are." They walked together toward the cemetery gates, leaving the headstones behind, but carrying the memories forward. Somewhere above them, a hawk circled in the crystalline sky, riding currents of wind that carried it higher and higher until it was just a speck against the infinite blue. Oduya watched it rise and felt something settle into place inside her. Peace, perhaps, or purpose, or simply the knowledge that she had done what she set out to do, and now a new chapter was waiting to be written. If you felt something during this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part. Tell us about a time when you witnessed someone reveal hidden strength, or share which character resonated with you the most. And remember, sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest burdens and fight the hardest battles. Never underestimate the power of someone who has learned to wait. She had been invisible to those who chose not to see. She had been silent when speaking would have accomplished nothing. She had been patient when patience was the only weapon she had left. And in the end, she had proven what she had always known. Some fights are not won with fists or fury. Some fights are won by simply refusing to break, refusing to bend, refusing to let the truth stay buried no matter how deep they try to dig its grave. Petty Officer First Class Kestrel Oduya had fought that kind of fight, and she had won.